I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two because of something as ordinary as a dresser drawer that wasn't fully closed. It was last Tuesday, late afternoon light slanting through my bedroom blinds, turning dust into glitter. I had just come in from folding laundry, still wearing the same faded sweatshirt I'd slept in, when my eyes caught it. The top drawer of my dresser sat slightly ajar, not wide open, not obviously ransacked, just wrong, like a sentence missing one letter. My throat tightened before my hand even reached for it. I pulled the drawer out slowly, the wood gliding with that familiar soft scrape. In the back, behind scarves and old winter gloves, I kept an envelope with emergency cash, a habit I'd had for years, ever since raising kids taught me that life doesn't warn you before it breaks something expensive. The envelope was there, but when I slid my fingers inside, it was weightless, empty, $1,000 gone. My stomach dropped so hard I actually had to sit down on the edge of the bed. I stared at that limp envelope like it had betrayed me personally, and the worst part was, I didn't have to guess who did it. Because the money wasn't the first thing that disappeared. Earlier that week, my big jar of quarters, the one I'd been filling for years without thinking, had somehow gone from heavy to hollow overnight. And just yesterday, my husband told me one of his credit cards had gone missing, only to show up as a charge at a gas station across town, a place he never goes. 2 weeks ago, we'd opened our home again, against every instinct I'd built from 16 years of blended family chaos. My stepdaughter, Heidi, 24, had moved in with her 2 little boys, Tommy, 5, and Lucas, 2.5. She cried when she asked, said she was leaving her husband, Dale, said she was finally done. I wanted to believe her. I needed to, because the boys' faces were too small to carry adult consequences. But now I was holding an empty envelope in my lap, listening to the quiet house, and realizing the truth with a cold, ugly clarity. I had let the problem back in. And this time, it hadn't just followed us into the living room. It had walked straight into my bedroom. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand the kind of home we had built, the kind of life I thought was strong enough to survive anything. I'm Gina, 57, and I've been married to Mason for almost 16 years. We're what people politely call a blended family, the kind that looks wholesome in holiday photos if you crop out the tension. I came into this marriage with children from my first marriage. Mason came with his own. And together, we had more, twins who are 12 now, and our youngest who's 10. The house has always been loud. Shoes by the door, leftover homework on the counter, someone always asking where the charger is. It's messy in that normal way. The kind of messy that feels like proof you belong somewhere. And because I'm older, because I've done the hard years already, I had gotten used to thinking the worst storms were behind me. Then Heidi came back. Heidi is Mason's daughter from his first marriage. She's 24 now, but if I'm honest, she's been the same storm since she was a teenager. Beautiful on the surface, chaos underneath. She wasn't evil. She wasn't some cartoon villain. She was something harder than that. A girl who always had help, and still kept choosing the cliff. When I met Mason, Heidi was 8. Her childhood was complicated in a way adults like to excuse, even when the child becomes an adult who keeps breaking things. Her mother, Mason's ex-wife, had adopted Heidi as an infant with her first husband, Dr. Robert Henderson. They divorced when Heidi was 6. Not because of abuse, not because of anything dramatic people can cling to like a clear reason, just plain betrayal. Robert cheated, and the marriage collapsed in the slow, ugly way so many do. After that, Heidi mostly lived with Robert, but she spent plenty of time with us. 2 homes, 2 sets of adults trying, financial stability, a bed that was always hers. And yet she was difficult, defiant, restless, like every rule was an insult and every consequence was someone else's fault. She barely finished high school. We pushed, we begged, we bribed with tutoring and patience and fresh starts. She'd nod, promise, cry, and then do the same thing again. Then came the pregnancy. Right before graduation, we found out Heidi was pregnant. I still remember Mason's face when he read the test results, like someone had grabbed his heart and squeezed. We had long conversations at the kitchen table, the kind where no one touches their coffee because it goes cold while you're trying to decide someone's entire future. We even agreed on an adoption plan for the baby. It wasn't about shame, it was about reality. And then Dale appeared. Dale was 34, 10 years older than Heidi, without even a GED, despite having chances to get one. Spotty job history, a grin that felt like a trick. He convinced Heidi to keep the baby and leave. She moved in with him. She even named her son after Dale, even though the biological father was actually her high school boyfriend. That should have been the moment I learned. Logic doesn't save you from someone determined to self-destruct. The next 5 years were an endless loop. Heidi and Dale bouncing between his mother's house, friends' couches, his sister's place. Then the lowest point, their boys staying with Dale's mother while Heidi and Dale were homeless, panhandling 2 hours away. A year ago, Robert, Mason, and I sat down, 3 exhausted adults, 3 different kinds of heartbreak, and agreed the boys needed stability. We took them in temporarily while Heidi and Dale figured things out. For a brief time, it looked like they did. They came back to town, found jobs, and we even helped them get an apartment, furnished it, paid the first few months' rent, made it crystal clear. After this, you stand on your own. They held it together for 6 months. Then, the moment they had to pay for their own rent, they stopped and got evicted. So when Heidi called 2 weeks ago, crying that she was leaving Dale because of drinking, drugs, and abuse, she knew exactly what to say. And like an idiot, like a woman who still believed there was a version of motherhood where love fixes things, I said yes. But I told her one condition. This only works if you truly divorce him. She swore she would. And now, I was holding an empty envelope, realizing she had never meant a word of it. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. They just didn't scream. They whispered. And I ignored them because the alternative, accepting what they meant, felt too cruel. The first few days after Heidi and the boys moved in, things felt manageable. She hugged me too tightly when she arrived, her arms lingering like she was afraid I'd disappear. She thanked me over and over, voice shaking, promising this time was different. I wanted to believe her. But small things started to itch at my awareness. She slept late, too late for someone supposedly job hunting. When I asked how interviews were going, she'd give vague answers. I'm waiting to hear back. They said next week. Always next week. Her phone never left her hand. She'd step outside to take calls, pacing the driveway with her back turned. When I asked if Dale was contacting her, she swore he wasn't, said she'd blocked him, said she was done. But at night, I'd hear her bedroom door creak softly, then the faint sound of her whispering into the phone, not angry, not scared, intimate. Mason noticed it too. He'd meet my eyes across the kitchen when her voice floated down the hallway, low and familiar. But neither of us said anything at first. We were tired. We were hoping silence would buy peace. The boys, meanwhile, told their own story. Tommy hoarded food in his room, crackers stuffed into toy boxes, granola bars, hidden under his pillow. When I gently asked him why, he shrugged and said, "Just in case." Lucas screamed at night. Not the normal toddler fussing, but full-body terror, like sleep wasn't safe. He clutched a stuffed elephant so hard his knuckles turned white. These weren't kids who had just gone through a divorce. These were kids who had lived in survival mode. Then came the absences. Heidi would disappear for hours without explanation. She'd say she was running errands or seeing a friend. She never took the boys with her, and when she came back, her pupils were sometimes too wide, her energy either jittery or hollowed out completely. One morning, I noticed my car wasn't running right, a strange sputter when I turned the key. Mason joked about it being old age catching up with the engine. I didn't laugh. Then the jar of quarters went empty. At first, I doubted myself. I stood there in the laundry room, shaking the jar, listening to the hollow rattle echo back at me. Maybe I'd cashed them in and forgotten. Maybe the kids had been playing with them. But I knew better. When Mason mentioned his credit card missing, said it must have slipped out of his wallet, I felt that same cold certainty crawl up my spine. And yet, I still didn't confront her. Because confronting Heidi always led to the same cycle: denial, tears, accusations that we were against her, followed by promises so desperate they almost sounded sincere. The tension in the house thickened. Mason grew quieter. Our younger kids noticed. They asked why Heidi slept so much, why the boys cried at night, why I double-checked my purse before leaving the room. The final seed, the one that rooted everything in place, was Dale. Despite my explicit rule, he hadn't disappeared. I found that out by accident. I came home early one afternoon and heard laughter upstairs. Male laughter, low, familiar. I froze halfway up the stairs, heart pounding. Then the front door slammed. Heidi came out of the bathroom a moment later, eyes darting. She said I must have imagined it, said stress was making me paranoid. That word, paranoid, landed like a warning shot. Because now, everything had a shadow. And when I opened that dresser drawer and found the envelope empty, All those whispers finally formed a single, undeniable sentence. She wasn't trying to rebuild her life. She was surviving, at our expense. The moment everything broke wasn't loud. There was no screaming at first, no dramatic accusation hurled across the room, just the soft click of my bedroom door closing behind me and the weight of certainty pressing down on my chest. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, holding that empty envelope like it might explain itself if I stared hard enough. My hands were steady. That scared me more than shaking would have. I didn't cry. Crying meant hope, and hope was gone. When Mason came home from work, I was still sitting there. He took one look at my face and didn't ask how my day was. "What's wrong?" he said quietly. I handed him the envelope. He didn't need me to explain. He opened the drawer himself, checked the back like he'd somehow find the money hiding from him. Then he exhaled, slow and heavy, like air leaving a tire. "How much?" he asked. 1,000, I said. "All of it." He closed his eyes, just for a second. When he opened them again, there was something different in his expression. Not anger. Resolve. We didn't confront Heidi immediately. That wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. We needed to be certain. We needed to protect the younger kids. And most of all, we needed to think about the boys upstairs, still napping, still blissfully unaware that their lives were about to tilt again. That night, we locked our bedroom door for the first time since moving into the house. It felt like a betrayal of everything I believed about family. The next morning, I woke up early. Too early. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain in the wood like it might keep me anchored. I replayed everything in my head. The missing quarters, the credit card, the lies about work, the phone calls in the dark. There was no room left for doubt. When Heidi came downstairs, her eyes were already red and puffy. Either she hadn't slept, or she had slept too well. She poured herself coffee without asking and sat across from me like nothing was wrong. I watched her hands. They trembled. "Heidi," I said, keeping my voice calm, "we need to talk." She stiffened immediately. About what? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I laid the envelope on the table between us. "The emergency cash is gone," I said. "So is the change jar. And Mason's credit card was used yesterday." Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then away. "I don't know anything about that," she said too quickly. I leaned forward slightly. "I need you to be honest with me." She laughed, sharp and defensive. "Why does everyone always assume it's me?" "Because it always is," my mind answered. But what I said was, "Because you're the only one who had access." Her shoulders dropped, not in guilt, in anger. "You don't trust me," she snapped. "No," I said evenly, "I don't." That stopped her. Silence filled the kitchen, thick and uncomfortable. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. One of the boys shifting in sleep. The sound made my chest ache. "Are you using again?" I asked. She slammed her mug down. Coffee sloshed over the rim. "How dare you," she said. "You think every problem I have is drugs." "I think stealing money from the people sheltering you points to something serious," I replied. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. Real tears, or very convincing ones. "I needed it," she whispered. "Just for a little while. I was going to put it back." "When?" I asked. "With what job?" That's when the anger came back, hot and fast. "You don't understand how hard my life is," she said. "You sit here in your comfortable house judging me." I stood up slowly. "I understand exactly how hard it is," I said, "and I understand what it does to children when adults don't protect them." Her mouth opened, closed. Then she said the thing that ended any chance of compromise. "I talked to Dale last night." My heart sank even though I already knew. "We're not done," she added. "He's trying, and I'm not divorcing him right now." That was it. I felt something inside me click into place, like a lock finally turning. "Then you need to leave," I said. Her head snapped up. "What?" "Today," I repeated. "You broke our agreement. You stole from us. You lied. You are not staying here." Her face crumpled. "You can't just throw me out." "I can," I said, "and I am." She looked toward the stairs. "What about the boys?" "They can stay," I said softly. "You can't." That's when she started screaming. She accused me of trying to steal her children, of hating her, of wanting her to fail. Her words bounced off the walls, sharp and frantic. But I stayed still, because for the first time I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. And this decision would change all of our lives. After she screamed herself hoarse, after the accusations circled the room like broken glass, something strange happened. She went quiet. Heidi sat back down in the chair, arms folded tight across her chest, staring into the coffee she hadn't touched since spilling it. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, like a child who'd finally realized crying wasn't changing the outcome. I stayed standing, not because I wanted power over her, but because if I sat, I might soften. And softness was what had gotten us here. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said finally. My voice sounded older than I felt. I'm doing this because the house isn't safe right now, and that's not negotiable. She shook her head slowly. You've never liked me, she muttered. That hurt more than I expected. I've spent 16 years trying to help you, I said. Those aren't the same thing. She looked up then, eyes red, rimmed with something like fear. Real fear, not performance. And for a split second, I saw the 8-year-old girl who used to sit on the edge of our couch, swinging her legs, asking if she could have cereal for dinner. I don't have anywhere to go, she said. I believed her. And still, my answer didn't change. You'll need to figure that out today, I replied. I'll give you until this evening to pack. She pushed back from the table and stormed upstairs, slamming her bedroom door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. I didn't follow her. Instead, I sat down, slowly this time, and let the weight of it all settle into my bones. Because now came the part no one ever talks about. The part after you draw the line. When you're left alone with the consequences. Mason came home earlier than usual that day. He'd taken time off without telling me, something he rarely did. He found me at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold hours ago. She's leaving? He asked. Yes, I said. He nodded once. Okay. That was all. We didn't argue. We didn't second-guess each other out loud. That, more than anything, told me we were doing the right thing. But then came the question that had been hovering between us since the night before. The boys, he said quietly. I swallowed. They stay, at least for now. He sat across from me, elbows on the table, fingers laced. His eyes were tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. She's not capable, he said. It wasn't anger. It was grief. No, I agreed, she isn't. We sat there in silence, listening to the house, listening for footsteps upstairs, for raised voices, for anything that would tell us how much damage today would leave behind. And then Mason said carefully, what happens if this isn't temporary? I closed my eyes, because that thought had already been circling my mind like a vulture. I don't know, I admitted, but I do know this. Sending them with her would be worse. He nodded. I was thinking the same thing. I stared at the table, at the tiny scratch near the edge from when one of the twins had dragged a chair too hard years ago. I've been thinking about something, I said slowly, and I don't know if it's insane or inevitable. Mason waited. What if we offered to adopt them? The words hung between us, heavy and terrifying. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. You mean legally? Yes. He leaned back, ran a hand over his face. That would mean she'd have to give up her rights. I know. And Dale, he added, he'd have to agree too. I know. The kitchen felt suddenly too small. She'll never go for that, he said. Maybe, I replied, but maybe she knows she can't do this anymore. We were interrupted by small footsteps. Tommy stood at the edge of the hallway, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, eyes wide. Lucas peeked out from behind his legs, thumb in his mouth. Are we in trouble? Tommy asked. My heart shattered. I stood up and walked over, kneeling in front of them, smoothing Tommy's hair back gently. No, I said softly. You're safe. He frowned. Is Mommy mad? I chose my words carefully. Mommy is dealing with grown-up problems. He thought about that, then nodded like he understood more than he should. Can we still stay here? He asked. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I smiled anyway. Yes, I said, you can stay here. That evening Heidi packed. She hugged the boys too tightly, promised she'd be back soon, said things I knew might never come true. When she walked out the door, she paused, turned back to me, and said quietly, I'll think about what you said. Then she was gone. And as I locked the door behind her, listening to the boys laugh in the living room, unaware of how close they'd come to losing everything, I knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. The house felt different the moment Heidi left. Not quieter. Quieter would have been a relief. It felt suspended, like everything was holding its breath, waiting to see if the ground would give way. That first night, Tommy asked 3 times if his mom was coming back before morning. Lucas cried until his voice went hoarse, then fell asleep sitting upright against the headboard, clutching his elephant like it was a life raft. I lay awake long after the house settled, staring at the ceiling, listening for a car that didn't come. Morning arrived anyway. Life doesn't pause for moral crises. I packed lunches, I tied shoes, I wiped peanut butter off a counter that hadn't asked to be part of any of this. And somewhere between pouring cereal and finding a missing sock, the weight of what we were doing pressed down on me in a new way. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were becoming the default. The days after Heidi left brought a slow, ugly unspooling of truths. The first was her relapse. I didn't want to believe it. Not fully, but every detail lined up too neatly to ignore. The jittery energy, the disappearing acts, the way her pupils sometimes swallowed her eyes whole. When Mason suggested I call her former workplace just to check, I hesitated, then dialed. Her supervisor didn't even sound surprised. She was fired 3 weeks ago, the woman said. We caught her using in the bathroom. I thanked her and hung up, my hand shaking slightly as I set the phone down. 3 weeks, which meant Heidi had been lying to us before she ever walked back into our house. And that was when the anger finally arrived. Not explosive, not dramatic, but cold and focused. The kind that sharpens your thinking instead of blurring it. More things went missing. Mason noticed jewelry gone from his dresser, pieces with history, things his mother had given him. I opened my office cabinet and found my coin collection, years of careful collecting, completely empty. The car, too. A mechanic confirmed what I'd suspected. Parts had been taken from the engine, stripped, sold. She hadn't just stolen cash. She'd dismantled our trust piece by piece. Meanwhile, the boys were changing. At first, their anxiety spiked. Tommy shadowing me from room to room, Lucas melting down if he couldn't see an adult within arm's reach. But slowly, something unexpected happened. They settled. They started sleeping through the night. Tommy stopped hiding food. One morning, I found his stash spot empty, not because he'd moved it, but because he no longer felt the need. Lucas started talking more, new words, clumsy and joyful, tumbling out of him like he was finally safe enough to use his voice. And that's when the conflict escalated in the way that hurts the most, because it forced us to choose. Heidi came back. Not to move in, not to apologize. To visit. She showed up unannounced one afternoon. Thinner than before, skin sallow, sores dotting her arms despite the long sleeves. My chest tightened when I saw her on the porch. I didn't let her inside. We sat in the backyard instead, the boys playing within eyesight. I never left her alone, not even for a second. Afterward, when Mason took the boys inside for lunch, Heidi turned to me. Maybe you were right, she said flatly. Maybe they're better off with you. I waited. Manipulation had taught me patience. I can't get clean, she continued. I've tried. I want to. For them. But I can't. And Dale... She shook her head. He's worse. The words landed heavy. What are you saying, Heidi? I asked. Her voice broke. Maybe you should adopt them. For a moment, I couldn't speak. This wasn't the plan forming in my head anymore. This was her saying it out loud. We talked for over an hour. I explained what adoption meant, legally, permanently. That this wasn't a break. That it couldn't be undone. She asked questions. Real ones, painful ones. And when she finally agreed to meet with a lawyer, I knew the situation had crossed a point of no return. Dale was harder. He was missing, homeless, using. When we finally tracked him down, living under a bridge, barely recognizable, he surprised all of us. He listened. The lawyer explained that he owed massive back child support, that consenting to the adoption would wipe it clean. That, coupled with his obvious inability to care for the boys, seemed to break through something in him. He didn't sign right away, but he didn't refuse. And while all of this churned, lawyers, paperwork, whispered conversations late at night, the boys kept doing what children do. They adapted. They laughed. They trusted. That was the part that scared me the most, because now the stakes were unbearable. Every decision we made would shape the rest of their lives. And there was one more layer, one I hadn't fully faced yet. Another couple, friends, good people. They loved Lucas, and an impossible idea was beginning to feel necessary. It hit me one evening while tucking Tommy into bed. His small hands gripped mine as he whispered, "Mommy, will they ever come back?" referring to Heidi, though I knew he meant their real family. Lucas clutched his elephant beside him, eyes wide and terrified that something permanent was about to vanish. I felt it in my chest, a weight I hadn't fully allowed myself to feel until that moment. The exhaustion of managing everything, the betrayal, the constant calculations to keep the boys safe. It coalesced into one sharp, cold truth. I couldn't fix everything. I walked into the living room after putting the boys to bed and sank into the couch. Mason sat across from me, silent, his face unreadable. For the first time, I realized the enormity of the situation. Heidi's addiction, Dale's failure as a parent, the piles of legal documents, the endless decisions, everything converged into a single, impossible burden. And yet, that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was my own doubt. I had always prided myself on being steady, patient, fair. But now, alone in the quiet of the living room, I questioned everything. Was I overstepping? Was I selfish to even consider adopting the boys? Was it my place to decide their fate? I thought about Heidi's eyes, the mix of shame, desperation, and something dangerously close to relief when I laid out the adoption option. Did she really understand what she was agreeing to? Or was this just another manipulation, one of the countless times she'd promised to change and failed? Mason broke the silence. Gina, you can't let yourself drown in this. They need you, and so do we. You can't fix Heidi, but you can fix them. I nodded, though my throat tightened. He was right, logically. But logic didn't erase the ache of being the person forcing this change upon a mother, even one so incapable of fulfilling her role. Then came the final, heartbreaking confirmation. The legal guardian's report after visiting our home and the boys. The guardian had written that Tommy and Lucas were thriving in our care, that their attachment to us had deepened in ways that gave them stability, and that the biological parents' ongoing struggles with addiction and homelessness made continued custody unsafe. Reading it, my hands trembled. I felt the line between doing what was necessary and feeling guilty for taking away someone else's children blur. The room seemed to spin slightly as the weight of reality pressed down. This wasn't a story of justice or revenge. It was a story of survival for the boys and for us. Later that night, I sat alone in the darkened kitchen, replaying the past months. Every lie, every stolen dollar, every relapse. It was all part of a tapestry that no one could untangle now. And yet, in the middle of the despair, a single truth emerged. If I hesitated, if I doubted myself too long, the boys might never have a safe, stable home. I stared at the coffee mug I'd left on the counter hours earlier, cold, unmoving, like the life I had to protect now, fragile, steadying, and entirely dependent on the choices I made next. I felt utterly alone, not abandoned, not by Mason or the boys, but isolated in the gravity of responsibility. In that moment, I understood what it meant to be completely powerless against circumstances, yet utterly responsible for their outcome. I let out a slow, shuddering breath. The floor beneath me felt too solid and yet unsteady, like the weight of a cliff I was clinging to while holding someone else's life in my hands. For a long while, I didn't move. I didn't think. I just felt. And in that feeling, the depth of despair became undeniable. The betrayal, the exhaustion, the fear, it was all here. I was standing at the bottom of the abyss, staring up at the uncertain light of tomorrow. The house was quiet. The boys slept upstairs. And I realized, painfully, that the next steps I took would define the rest of their lives. Because there was no returning to the way things were. No forgiveness would erase the months of chaos. No promises could undo the damage. Only action. Only courage. And the knowledge that, for these children, their survival rested squarely on the shoulders of someone willing to step forward, even when it felt impossible. The turning point came unexpectedly, in the middle of a quiet Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing the adoption paperwork, when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I hesitated. Part of me braced for more bad news, but I answered. "Hi, Gina," a calm, firm voice said. "This is Dr. Robert Henderson. I wanted to speak with you about Heidi." I froze. Robert, the father who had always cared, but had long since let the weight of Heidi's choices overwhelm him, had never called me for casual conversation. The tone in his voice wasn't urgent. It was measured, deliberate. "I've been reviewing the situation," he continued, "and I wanted to confirm something important. Heidi has finally agreed to the adoption plan. Dale is being cooperative. You're doing the right thing, Gina. The boys need stability, and you and Mason are providing it." I felt a strange mix of relief and terror. Relief, because finally someone neutral was confirming what I already suspected deep down. Terror, because the responsibility I had been carrying, the full scope of choices and consequences, was now undeniable. There was no going back. I thanked him, hanging up the phone with trembling hands. I stared at the paperwork before me, the signatures and legal language that would forever alter the boys' lives. That night, I called Mason into the living room. He sat beside me, silent, sensing the change in my demeanor. "They've agreed," I said quietly. "Heidi, Dale, the boys. Everything is moving forward. We have to finalize this." Mason exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It's finally happening. Yes, I whispered. Finally. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. We met with the lawyer, signed preliminary documents, and arranged supervised visits with Heidi to ensure she understood the permanence of her decision. She came reluctantly, guarded, eyes downcast. For the first time, though, I saw cracks in her defiance, glimpses of guilt, recognition of her own limitations. Maybe they are better off with you, she admitted quietly one afternoon, her voice flat but genuine. I didn't respond immediately. I let her words hang in the air. They weren't absolution, they weren't gratitude, but they were acknowledgement, a subtle shift that made the impossible feel real. Then came Dale. Finding him had been a challenge. Homeless, addicted, unstable, he was the final obstacle. But when Robert and the lawyer confronted him, he surprised us. I can't provide for them, he said quietly, eyes darting toward the ground. I know you're right. Sign whatever you need to. His surrender wasn't joyous, it was heavy, reluctant. But it cleared the last hurdle. The boy's future was no longer dangling by threads of uncertainty. That night, I sat alone in the dim kitchen light, the quiet punctuated only by the boy's soft breathing. Upstairs, for the first time in months, the fear, the anger, the exhaustion, they didn't feel suffocating. They felt manageable, because now there was clarity. I realized something crucial. The weight of responsibility, while terrifying, had given me perspective. I wasn't just reacting to chaos anymore. I was shaping a future, not for me, not for Heidi, not for Dale, but for Tommy and Lucas. I allowed myself to envision what that future might look like. Breakfasts without fear, bedtime stories with laughter, consistency, and love that had been absent for too long, and for the first time, I saw hope. I understood something essential about myself. I could be strong without being unkind. I could enforce boundaries without abandoning compassion. I could take responsibility for others' lives when they themselves were unable to. And I realized another truth, quietly but firmly. This moment, this turning point, was not just about adoption. It was about reclaiming my own agency, standing firm in the face of betrayal and chaos, and choosing courage over despair. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not the weary caretaker, not the frustrated enforcer, not the fearful woman balancing on the edge, but the person who could hold the line and protect what mattered most. The days following the final agreements brought a sense of calm I hadn't expected. But calm was never quiet. It was active, a tense rearrangement of our lives into a new order. The truth about Heidi and Dale's unreliability spread slowly through our network of friends and family. Subtle whispers and revelations that left them exposed, while cementing the stability we were creating for the boys. Mason and I finalized the adoption paperwork first. Sitting in the lawyer's office, watching the signatures go onto the documents, I felt an unfamiliar weight lift. These weren't just legal words. They were a shield for Tommy and Lucas, and a barrier between them and the chaos that had followed Heidi and Dale for years. The court-appointed guardian had verified our home, our routines, the boys' adjustment, and her report was unequivocal. Gina and Mason provide a stable, loving environment. The biological parents are incapable of doing so. Heidi didn't come to court unaccompanied. The lawyer and Robert were there to ensure she understood the permanence of her decision. She looked fragile but composed, acknowledging with small nods the reality that she could no longer provide a safe life for her children. Dale, after a long period of being unreachable, finally signed the consent forms. His surrender wasn't joyous, nor did it come with relief, just recognition. It was enough. And then came the second layer, the adoption of Lucas by Mark and Jennifer. The process was delicate, requiring careful explanations to the boys, meticulous coordination with our lawyer, and frequent visits to help Lucas adjust. The first days were awkward. Lucas clutched at me, refusing to let go, while Tommy stayed close, uncertain of the shifting dynamics. But Mark and Jennifer were patient, warm, and consistent. Gradually, Lucas responded, trusting these new adults without replacing his connection to us or to Tommy. Once the adoptions were official, the fallout rippled beyond our home. Heidi's reputation faltered among friends and acquaintances who had known fragments of her choices, but hadn't seen the full pattern. The stories of theft, deception, and repeated relapses spread quietly, painting a clear picture of the consequences of continued irresponsibility. Dale, too, became largely invisible, his choices and addictions, having pushed him completely out of the lives of those who mattered. Family dynamics shifted as well. My parents and Mason's parents, who had tiptoed around conflict for months, finally breathed. There were no more phone calls demanding explanations or apologies for events beyond my control. They began to recognize the stability we had fought for and quietly supported the decisions we had made. Even Heidi's estranged moments with her relatives, those fleeting, manipulative attempts to draw sympathy, fell flat against the undeniable truth. She had voluntarily relinquished responsibility. At home, the air itself seemed lighter. Tommy and Lucas, finally secure, began to flourish in ways that had seemed impossible months before. They laughed freely, slept through the night, and expressed themselves without fear. Their routines became predictable and comforting. Dinners at consistent times, bedtime stories, play dates, and school preparations. The tension that had permeated every room, every conversation, every silent glance, dissipated like fog under morning sun. I watched Mason interact with the boys and felt a swell of pride and relief. His patience, his quiet firmness, and his unwavering support had been essential in weathering the storm. I also recognized my own growth, my ability to enforce boundaries without fear, to protect those who could not protect themselves, to act decisively in moments that demanded courage. The truth about Heidi and Dale lingered, of course. Their failures were real, painful, and visible, but the consequences now landed squarely where they belonged. The boys were safe, their futures secured, and I, finally, could breathe without the constant weight of uncertainty pressing down. Sitting in the living room one evening, watching Tommy and Lucas build a tower of blocks, I realized the depth of what we had accomplished. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was justice in the form of care, structure, and love, the kind that children deserve and that we had been brave enough to provide. And as the boys laughed and Mason leaned back with quiet satisfaction, I knew that while the journey had been brutal, the fallout, the consequences landing squarely on the right shoulders, was a victory in its purest form. Months later, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost unimaginable when I first held that empty envelope in my hands. The chaos, the lies, the fear, they were all behind us. Tommy thrived in our care. Lucas blossomed in Mark and Jennifer's home, returning often for visits that reminded him and Tommy of the bond that even adoption couldn't break. I watched them play together one sunny afternoon, building towers of blocks and laughing at the simplest things. And in their joy, I saw the proof that every difficult choice, every confrontation, every boundary we had set had been worth it. They were safe. They were loved. And, most importantly, they were growing into children, unburdened by the mistakes of adults. Heidi and Dale's paths diverged permanently. Heidi remained in her treatment program, slowly, painstakingly reconstructing a life she had repeatedly destroyed. Dale disappeared, left to face the consequences of choices he had long refused to acknowledge. I felt no satisfaction in their failures, only relief that they could no longer endanger the children in my care. For Mason and me, the experience transformed our understanding of family. Love isn't defined solely by biology. It isn't measured by legal documents. Family is forged in the daily acts of protection, sacrifice, and commitment. It's about stepping up when those who should cannot. It's about making hard decisions, guided not by guilt or anger, but by what is right for the most vulnerable. I learned, too, about my own strength. The woman who had hesitated, doubted, and nearly let fear paralyze her had been replaced by someone capable of decisive action without cruelty, capable of boundaries without resentment. Trauma and chaos can break a family, but they can also teach resilience, empathy, and the quiet power of steadfast love. Looking back now, I see the journey clearly. There will always be tough choices, unexpected storms, and moments where the weight feels unbearable. But I also know this: courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. Integrity isn't measured by comfort, it's proven in the choices we make when no one is watching. And for the boys, and for every child like them, I hope they remember one thing: that there are people in the world willing to fight for your safety, your happiness, and your future, even when it isn't easy, even when it costs everything. Because that is love, that is family, and that is worth everything we can give.